let's lead off with, what are flood zones, and what, is there more than one zone, obviously?
Right. There's essentially two zones along the shore. There's an A zone, and I don't know what A stands for. I've researched it. Maybe it's advisory, but that is most of the island that's inland, not along the coast, is in the A zone. The second zone is called the V zone. V is in victory. And that zone is along the bay and along the beach, and with the new FEMA maps, they've kind of expanded the V zone into the island a little bit more. So there's a lot of people who always knew they were in a low-lying area, but really never thought of themselves as being near the beach or bay, who are now in this V zone. Now, we're told that in 2015, the proposed V zone potentially could shrink. So we're told it's very conservative, and that if it shrinks, there'll be a lot of happy people out there. But the difference between, there's two differences between the A zone and the V zone. First, a V zone property has to be higher than an A zone. And secondly, a V zone property has to be built on piers or pilings, where an A zone structure can be built on a concrete foundation. So that's really the second worry. If you have a home that is an older home, and it was in an A zone, and it's moving to a V zone, now you not only have to raise it, but potentially you might have to change the foundation. And that has a lot of people wondering, is it really worth changing the foundation and elevating it, or just tearing the structure down?
You touched on something that, you said the map could shrink a little bit, or those V zones. Is that a velocity zone? Is that what they call it?
It's a velocity zone, yes.
Sounds exciting, actually. But I understand that, and you can tell me if there's any truth to this, that the city may have hired some engineers to battle that. We don't necessarily agree with some of those zones, and I know the city's working diligently to make it fair, because there are some inland areas that you'd be shocked to know that are in that so-called V zone.
Well, FEMA actually admitted, really it was just had to do with height of the structure. They didn't really take into account intervening structures, whether there's islands, the depth of the bay. There's a lot of data that needs to be analyzed before they come up with these formal zones. We're going to find out this fall how the zones kind of evolve into what's called a preliminary zone, and then that'll be debated some more, and then eventually in 2015 at the earliest, probably 2016, or maybe, who knows, the government hasn't done anything quick in my lifetime. When it's formally adopted, we'll know exactly where the zones are.
So you talked about the two zones. I guess, let's talk about foundation a little bit. You started to touch on that, block foundations in this zone, that zone. Maybe clarify that a little more, detail that.
Yeah, Ocean City actually has also adopted what they call +2 ordinance, which means FEMA says you have to be to a base elevation. Ocean City says that's great, but we want our homes to be elevated even higher. Because again, back to the community discount, if all the homes are higher, then everyone gets more of a discount on their flood policy.
So the city
the city adopted that ordinance and have moved it into their construction code.
They'll benefit as a whole then. It's a proactive approach.
It's very proactive, and I think that's good. So the A zones, so every structure in an A zone has to be a +2 over the FEMA base flood elevation. If you're in a V zone, you have to be a +3, and this is where it gets a little tricky. If your joists are running perpendicular to the ocean or bay, you're a +3. If they run parallel to the ocean or bay, you're actually a +4, because there's more of a likelihood that the water can batter in against the perpendicular joists.
So when you say plus and the number, that is over the base flood elevation, which is what right now?
That FEMA determines.
I guess they haven't determined the new base flood elevation?
Well, they've come up with a preliminary base, and
okay.
What was a 10 before, according to
10,
FEMA.
Okay, it used to be 10.
With the new data conversion, they are now calling it a 9, and Ocean City is +2 on top of that. So Ocean City's now 11, but again, you can't compare it to your old elevation certificates. you have to do this simple, kind of a data conversion from the 1929 way of measuring height to the 1988 measurement, which is what they're using today. And it's really not something a layman should try to do. I'm going to show you how to do it, but really your best calling a surveyor. You don't want to wire your own home. You don't want to plumb your own toilet unless you really know what you're doing.
This is the disclaimer portion of our video.
What we're saying,
don't try this at home.
Call a surveyor. You'll be thankful. They'll do the conversion for you. And I guess what is upsetting is the older homes that were built prior to '75. A lot of them don't have surveys because it wasn't required. They didn't have to do it. So it's worth somewhere between $350 and $450 to pay for a surveyor, have a brand new elevation certificate done, and then you'll know exactly where your house stands, and you'll know where you need to be in order to comply with the new ordinance.
Let me ask you this: How about the and we've had so many of them, the traditional Ocean City cottage that was sitting at like 7 or 8 feet.
Yeah.
Obviously had we had a pretty bad situation with that. It most likely got water. Talk to me a little bit about what are people's options at that point, because that sounds like that would be somebody going from a favorable zone maybe 25, 30 years ago to maybe a not so favorable, to go into that V zone.
Right.
What would that person do? What option does that person have?
Well, a great question, because every home built after '75, I say every, but I'd say 99% of the homes built after '75 had no water in their living space. Every structure that got wet in their living space is a pre-firm structure. The older and firm stands for flood insurance rate map. So
pre-firm was prior to 75.
Prior to 75, post-firm is after 75. So at that point, if your home is substantially damaged, you have two options: either to elevate the structure or to tear it down. And that's an upsetting thought, obviously, but with all the expense that you have in raising a structure, you really might want to think about the economic benefit of having a new structure that's totally flood compliant and potentially could be worth more on the marketplace.
I've had a few clients that have done that. They've actually, some of the choices that I'm seeing, and I've read this in the newspaper too, people are abandoning their homes, not in a bad way. They're not just walking away from them, but basically saying, hey, if land value is $400,000, they're just selling it and moving on. And mostly I've seen that with elderly folks that don't have the energy, don't have the means to come back, because obviously they probably went and lived with family. And I think one of the conversations you and I had is that type of home that may have become that damaged, that went now to this velocity V zone, is really the one that's probably looking at more cost going into it, because I understand this something about breakaway foundations versus block foundations is not going to be an option to do block anymore, right? In that V zone.
In the V zone. It has to be on piers or pilings. It has to have breakaway walls, which essentially is lattice.
With stucco over it.
With stucco over it, or something that can break away.
Let water filter through.
And not actually damage the integrity of the structure. And I've heard that too. There are some homeowners that just don't have the energy to elevate, and they're selling their property as is. I feel that Ocean City land is going to continue to escalate in value. It's a resort that people want to come to. In my mind, why are they taking a hit on the property? I think there's going to be kind of a rush in to buy up these properties, and
there's been a lot of construction going on because of that, and it was good for both sides. Again, most people were probably within a year or two of a decision of maybe not living here any longer. So,
right.
Rather than take on 50, 60, 70, 120, whatever, it depends on the size of the house, again, where the zone is, what type of foundation is required, are your pilings, are they actually doing the job now, or are they inadequate because you can't just add all this more, add more foundation weight onto a bad piling. So some people are having to look at driving new pilings, actually moving the house up over to the side, new pilings, bring it back. So
and cash flow is an obvious.
Yeah. So you look at that. You definitely have some options. This is not to scare anyone. It's just to explain what some of the what's been actually happening over the last few months since the storm. You explained that age was a factor. You explained the +2, and now I hear
age isn't always a factor. And I guess the main point is the pre-firm
home
structures.
age.
Right, the
Home age.
not your age, Chris. The home age prior to 75, there was really no height requirement for a home. Some were built high, just on their own. They just built them high enough, and they're probably compliant with today's rules and regulations. They might not be compliant with what potentially could come out in 2015, but the penalty is not going to be great. It's going to be very small. And then there's other homes that were built prior to 70 that are almost right on the ground. And it's the low-lying structures that are kind of in that position to either tear it down or elevate.
I've honestly noticed how important and valuable and hot that second floor condos have become since you're sitting up about 20 feet. You're not so worried.
I have a lot of people say, I live on the second floor, do I need to buy flood insurance? And I say, well, if you have a mortgage, really they're protecting the entire building, especially with condominiums. Right. And if your foundation were to be destroyed, your second floor would eventually be on the ground. So, yes, you do have to buy flood insurance.
A duplex would become a single. So
maybe that would make them happy.
Well, that's true. Is there anything else you can add as far as, well, actually, that's what I wanted to say. I wrote this down. We keep talking about 2015, so essentially we have a year and a half, and I don't know, what I'm hearing is kind of an opportunity time period. I fail to see the negative side of anything, so I don't know, maybe it is a bad thing, but I'm seeing that with education, with the knowledge, with future plans, where you're going. This town's always been about emotion,
right,
and excitement, and gosh.
But in this
generation
case,
after generation,
knowledge is power,
right?
And there's going to be certainly opportunities for people to buy property that maybe they couldn't have afforded otherwise. And as I said, at the end of the day, we're going to have a town that is safer and less susceptible to flood damage.
That's true. And you started to tell me something off camera about as we become a more stable and better prepared community for which is what all this is going to be. All this is happening right now. You're in motion, right. And over the next few years, with the proactive steps that our construction codes have taken, the town has taken as General City of Ocean City, the insurance company, you guys, FEMA. When we have all this preparation to handle this, you were saying something about private industry will become attracted.
Great point. I'm glad you reminded me.
To come back on that.
As the rates become more adequately sound, according to FEMA, we're going to see the private industry come in and start to compete against the federal government. I see that as a good thing, because when you have competition, you also see suppression of rates. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 carriers fighting for the flood policy, they'll start to discount the coverage or the cost of the coverage. I think additionally in the short term, we're going to see some companies offering some we'll call wraparound products that will not only give you additional, possibly the ability to buy additional limits, but also to buy some coverage where the FEMA flood policy excludes coverage today. Might not necessarily be on the ground floor or in your garage, contents in your garage, but they might provide the rental expense to use another unit while your home is being repaired by the flood. I know that the industry is really taking a hard look at stepping in and participating in offering flood insurance.
I actually think that would be a great product to have, because with the tragedy that came through, it exposed a lot of areas that we were just not prepared for, and so
I agree.
And we've all experienced some of the gaps that were involved in, right. What if the flood insurance essentially made you whole again, but it didn't make it like it was before.
Yeah.
So those gaps, that would be a good product, I think, to have here. I think our customers would see value in that.
It will be. And the flood, unfortunately, the policy offered by the federal government today is the only one available for flood at the coast. There's no other markets today. And because there's really no competition, in my mind, it's a pretty basic policy. It's very limiting in what coverage it offers. And unless you really read that 19-page policy ensuring one thing, and that's rising waters, you're not going to know every exclusion or limitation on the policy. And I think that's where people, they get frustrated. They look to us and say, I wish I knew. And we're doing a better job with our handouts. But even with our handouts, we're not going to cover every limitation that's contained in a policy form. So if you have a mortgage today, unfortunately, you have to buy flood insurance. But at the end of the day, I think there's also a lot of people that were happy that they had it because it bailed them out. And I would say in many cases, if not most, people who had severe damage were able to rebuild with the help of the flood policy.
Great. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming again today and speaking with, honestly, I think we figured out about 6,500 people will be viewing this video, so we'll take a nice bite out of all the people that either have home ownership or did have home ownership here on the island for a lot of years, and hopefully you'll find some value in this. Be sure and look at the PDF we're going to attach to this, because it's going to have a ton of information. I mean, we'd be sitting here talking for about 16 hours, if maybe not quite that long. But
take a couple hours to cover everything. It really would.
But also, where I sell real estate, and Tom's your insurance professional, so I want you to feel free to reach out to Tom and his agency if you have any questions, and we'll have numbers attached as well to that information. So.
That's a great point. I have a lot of people that are not customers that are calling and saying, I just need your advice on something.
Yeah, call. I mean, he gave us time today, and I thank him for doing it because he wants to help. And, we align ourselves with like-kind people, and he's in the customer service industry as I am. Yeah. So we thank you. As always, we're grateful for the opportunity, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions for either one of us. Thank you.